Welcome back to Kleppers Corner. Today in history, November 14th, a day that looked at the rest of the calendar and said, you know what? I'm not going to pick one vibe. I'm going to have all the vibes. This day has everything. Philosophers dying, painters being born, rockets being electrocuted, little girls being braver than entire state governments, global jihads, global races, global dust storms, and one of the most tragic sports disasters in U.S. history. November 14th is history's version of that guy at a party who insists on telling you about his cryptocurrency portfolio, his screenplay, his doomsday bunker, and his kombucha recipe all at once. So strap in, or buckle up, or grab a helicopter, a federal marshal, and the lightning rod, because November 14th does not come to play. It comes to change the world, confuse critics, and occasionally set something on fire. Segment 2. Welcome to Vietnam. Please keep your hands and feet inside the helicopter. Ia Drang begins. If November 14th had a motto, it would be start something huge, complicated, and probably on fire. On this date in 1965, the Battle of Ia Drang began, the first major confrontation between U.S. forces and North Vietnamese regulars. It was the debut of air mobile warfare, helicopters, mobility, a military concept brought to you by the same energy as someone saying, what if cars, but airborne, and also were shooting at you? Hal Moore and his 450 men were dropped right next to 1,600 North Vietnamese troops. Imagine ordering a lift and getting dropped off at a surprise party you didn't plan, and everyone there is trying to kill you. Meanwhile, Major Bruce Crandall was flying in and out under fire like DoorDash, but for ammo and wounded soldiers. This was the battle that convinced U.S. commanders they could win by attrition, and convinced the North Vietnamese they could win by just refusing to lose. It was the rare conflict where both sides walked away saying, oh yeah, we totally got this, which is exactly how you end up with a decade-long war. November 14th, the day two armies looked at a valley and said, yeah, let's ruin this place together. Segment 3, the smallest giant. Ruby Bridges walks into history. Jump from the Vietnamese jungle to New Orleans, 1960, where another November 14th moment required courage on a scale that puts most adults to shame. Ruby Bridges, age 6, surrounded by federal marshals, walked through mobs of adults screaming at her because she wanted to go to school. 6 years old. At 6, I was afraid of thunderstorms and lima beans. Ruby was braver than entire school boards. She integrated the William Frantz Elementary School alone, and for an entire year, she was the only kid in her classroom. The rest of the students' parents pulled them out, because apparently the idea of sharing a hallway with a child was too much for their delicate, segregation-loving hearts. Her teacher, Barbara Henry from Boston, taught her one-on-one, like some civil rights-themed version of Good Will Hunting. Ruby never missed a day, not one. And the racism didn't stop at the schoolhouse door. Her father lost his job. Her family was targeted. Her grandparents were evicted. America, or even first graders, can trigger a national meltdown. And here's the kicker. The same date Ruby took that walk was the date Booker T. Washington died in 1915. The man who advocated a slower, go-along-to-get-along strategy for black progress. November 14th said, we're doing a hard pivot today. Segment 4. Apollo 12, the moon mission that God tried to cancel. Now let's go to space, a place that, on November 14th, 1969, seemed extremely interested in removing humans from it. Apollo 12 launched into a rainy sky, which NASA apparently thought was fine. At 36.5 seconds after liftoff, lightning hit the rocket. Then lightning hit it again. Imagine being in the world's biggest metal cylinder and hearing Mother Nature shout, "Return to sender." Inside, every warning light lit up. Mission Control got data that looked like someone spilled alphabet soup on a computer. The mission was seconds from abort until controller John Aaron yelled, "SCE to aux." That command was so obscure, it might as well have been, "Turn the ship off and on again." And somehow, astronaut Alan Bean actually found the switch. Because nothing says space hero like being able to locate a tiny toggle in a vibrating coffin of fire. After nearly dying, the crew then executed a perfect pinpoint landing near Surveyor 3. Pete Conrad hopped out, yelled yippee, and went to retrieve parts of a robot that had been sitting on the moon like a neglected Roomba. If Apollo 11 was a miracle, Apollo 12 was a miracle performed while being electrocuted. Segment 5, Tragedy on the Ground, the Marshall University air disaster. Fast forward to November 14th, 1970. The day history didn't roar, it broke. A charter flight carrying the Marshall University football team crashed just short of the runway in West Virginia. 75 people died. Players, coaches, staff, boosters, and the crew. An entire town lost not just a team, but a generation of leaders. The NTSB determined the cause as controlled flight into terrain, which is aviation language for everything was working except the part where the plane didn't hit the ground. Bad weather, possible altimeter error, unclear cockpit readings. It all combined into heartbreak. The community rebuilt its football program under coach Jack Langle. Freshmen were allowed to play, walk-ons filled the roster, and the young Thundering Herd took the field. Their first home win, scored on a last-second touchdown, became one of those moments that makes you cry even if you don't like football, or West Virginia, or feelings. November 14th giveth. November 14th taketh away. And sometimes it devastates an entire city. Segment 6, Call Me Sales Disaster, the U.S. release of Moby Dick. On November 14th, 1851, the U.S. publication of Moby Dick arrived, and America responded with a collective, "What the hell is this?" Britain had already released a butchered version, missing the epilogue. You know, the part explaining why the narrator isn't dead, which is a pretty big omission. It's like releasing Titanic, but cutting the part where Rose survives. Reviews called it confusing, long-winded, and mad English, which is what I call my dog after he eats crayons. Melville sold barely 2,600 copies in 2 decades. Meanwhile, Uncle Tom's Cabin sold 10,000 copies in 2 weeks. Melville died obscure, broke, and unaware that future scholars would resurrect his book like literary necromancers, saying, "Actually, this whale slaps." It wasn't until after World War I, when humanity collectively went, "Life is meaningless and nature hates us," that people suddenly said, "Oh yeah, this book hits different." Sometimes masterpieces just need a little global trauma to really land. Segment 7. Nellie Bly says, "Hold my steamship." November 14th, 1889. Nellie Bly boards a steamship to race around the world. Not metaphorically, literally. She wanted to beat Phileas Fogg's fictional 80-day record because apparently journalism standards were looser back then. "Miss Bly, what's your angle?" "I will physically outrun a novel." Her editor said no. Another journalist threatened to do it. Suddenly, he said yes. Pulitzer-era journalism truly was do it first, figure out the ethics later. Cosmopolitan sent a rival reporter, Elizabeth Bisland, the same day, turning the whole thing into the great Victorian girl boss off. Bly didn't even know she was in a race until Hong Kong. That's how fast this woman was. She outran her own plot. She finished in 72 days. People cheered. America loved her. Jules Verne met her. And the entire British Empire served as her travel infrastructure. Because nothing says women can do anything like relying on global colonial sea lanes to prove it. Segment 8. Births, Deaths, and Declarations, a grab bag of world-changing energy. November 14th also gives us Claude Monet, born 1840, a man who said, "What if painting, but blurrier," and created modern art. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who died in 1831, after spending a lifetime explaining that history moves forward through conflict, which is a very polite way of saying humans make progress by being terrible to each other. Booker T. Washington, who died in 1915, championing economic uplift over confrontation. On the same date, Ruby Bridges would later walk straight through confrontation. Symbolism. In 1889, the birth of Jawaharlal Nehru, who helped build modern India and basically invented non-alignment, where not Team US or Team USSR. We're Team Please Stop Calling Us. In 1948, King Charles III was born, a man who waited longer for his job than any human being not trapped in a Comcast customer service loop. And in 1914, the Ottoman Empire declared a global jihad, a move historians call ineffective politically, inconvenient strategically, and deeply on brand. Segment 9. Humanity leaves the planet. Mariner 9 orbits Mars. On November 14, 1971, Mariner 9 became the first spacecraft to orbit another planet. It arrived at Mars and immediately found Mars in the middle of the largest dust storm ever recorded. The planetary equivalent of showing up to take pictures of someone's house and finding it wrapped in a beige bedsheet. NASA waited until the dust settled because sometimes exploration requires patience, and sometimes it requires saying, let's not photograph a planet that currently looks like a used lint filter. Once visibility improved, Mariner 9 delivered images of volcanoes, canyons, dried riverbeds, and 2 moons that look like bruised potatoes. It mapped 85% of Mars and gave us our first real hint that Mars was once watery, not just dusty and angry. November 14th, where even Mars gets dramatic. In conclusion, what do we do with a date like November 14th? A day that contains genius and tragedy, courage and collapse, lightning strikes and literary flops, global races and global wars, first steps toward justice and last breaths of empires. This day is a reminder that history isn't tidy. It doesn't take turns. It doesn't wait for you to process one event before throwing another at you. It stacks contradictions like a cosmic Jenga tower. November 14th is humanity in miniature. Brilliant, terrible, courageous, ridiculous, innovative, destructive, hopeful. A concentrated batch of our best and worst impulses. And history's message is clear. We are always one moment away from bravery or disaster or genius or reinvention, sometimes all on the same day.